Thanks very much, Rolf. And my guess is I'll say next slide, right? So next slide. Great. So thank you, everybody. I don't know how many people of you have white hair like me, but if you do, you remember that, believe it or not, laptops did not have Wi-Fi early on. So you had to buy one of these port adapter dongles to be able to get Wi-Fi on your laptop. We're talking about water heaters mainly, and 90 million residential homes in the United States have 90 million water heaters, and about 10% of them break every year, and that means 9 million new water heaters are put in the field every year. And 10 years ago, EPRI and the utilities went to the appliance manufacturers, including water heaters, and said, we envision a world where we need to orchestrate appliances. Instead of them going on at the random time like they do, they need to go on at the right time and support the grid. And the water heater people said, we don't have any connectivity in our water heater or scheduling. How would you like to connect to them? And the utilities didn't say Wi-Fi. They said Wi-Fi, cellular, smart meter mesh, power line carrier. Please go to the next slide. So that right away meant that the utilities said, wait a minute, we make 9 million water heaters a year, and now you're asking us to make a separate copy for each kind of connectivity. We can't do that. We need a modular approach. So for the last 10 years, CTA 2045 has been the hardware standard. It's the only standard that represents hardware ports for appliances. You can see at the bottom of this slide that it supports OpenADR. You can have that in the cloud or in the module. DNP3 in the cloud or in the module. 2030.5 in the cloud or in the module. But CTA 2045 is the only standard that has a module where the port can be in the appliance. And look at everything you get in the bullets here. You get future-proofing the asset for life. If the vendor of the module goes out of business, mail somebody a module from a different vendor, it'll work. There's no stranded assets. Even if the water heater manufacturer goes out of business, there will always be a way to control that water heater. It guarantees vendor optionality. I just mentioned that also. Module vendors can innovate much more quickly. We can send firmware to these modules at any time. We can test it and we can update it. The water heater, they make a water heater every 4 seconds. So it's critical to, they have to test everything and make sure it works. Finally, there's low cost at scale. In other words, when you have one module and the utility can buy a module and it goes into the water heater, into the pool pump, into the mini split, then you get scale, lower cost electronics. And finally, it allows more competition. There are some appliance manufacturers that are smaller and don't have their own Internet of Things cloud like Rheem and A.O. Smith do. And this allows them to just make a simple port. I'll show you what that looks like. And then they can be grid capable without having an Internet of Things cloud of their own. Next slide, please. So this is the appliance family right now. You've got water heaters, pool pumps from Pentair, Ptax from Island Air in New York, Siemens EV chargers, and Mitsubishi mini splits, with more coming on. Next slide. Now these are the physical details. So what you're looking at is that little DC module that's powered by low voltage, can go into thermostats. You're also seeing the prototype of the certification testing box that's coming out that Geoff will talk about soon as well. Next slide. Here you see the physical details of the AC port. So you can see how it's a low-cost port that can be put in a water heater. The water heater then has to have a little bit of a brain to be able to process commands, but a lot of the complexity can go into the module or into the cloud. Next slide, please. And then finally, OEMs hedged their bets for a bit, so Siemens put their port inside their hardware, whereas A.O. Smith and Mitsubishi initially did a port adapter so that they didn't have to change their 4 million water heaters pumping out one every 4 seconds. So the port adapter added a little cost, but now that there's regulations mandating CTA 2045 ports in water heaters, which you'll hear about soon, all of the manufacturers are committing to putting the port directly into the appliance. Rheem has already done it. A.O. Smith is doing it soon. Next slide, please. So here, there's engineering details. I only want to point out that at the bottom low right corner, there's the big one, the high voltage 110 to 240 volts uses RS-485, and the small one, low voltage, uses SPI. Everything else makes sense when you see that it's a hardware port that supports a cloud and a module that can have security of their own and any kind of software like OpenADR or 2030.5. Next slide. Here are appliance family details. It tells you which ones are AC and which ones are DC. Next slide, please. I just did that so that people would have it for the record. One of the things we're excited about, so water heaters provide about 200 to 300 watt hours of storage. That's a small amount, but at scale with 13 million in California, for example, or Geoff might know the number for Washington and Oregon. I think it might be 500,000, a couple 100,000 a year, maybe 5 million in all. But the central multifamily systems, we're working with Sandon and Mitsubishi and some others to try and bring CTA to those, and they represent on average 35,000 watt hours of value. So very exciting, much bigger loads to shift, shimmy, and shed, as Lawrence Berkeley Lab says. Next slide, please. So one of the big advantages of CTA 2045 is it allows the appliance to be smarter, and the grid signals come in, and the appliance can adapt and be thinking about the customer comfort, thinking about the grid, and making smart decisions. So if you look at the colored bar at the top of that graph, you see that this is 24 hours of one day. From midnight to about 6 in the morning, it was green and light green, which is idle normal, which means it was just cooling off. You can see the storage capacity, green line in the graph, increasing. Then at 5:30 in the morning, we did a little purple, which was a load up. We said load up, you can see the instantaneous power that is reported in brown. It goes to 4,500 watts. It's an electric resistance. And then load up for half an hour right before usage. And then the shed is in pink. That's 6 to 9 o'clock in the morning. It says turn off. You can see the water heater cooling off as the green storage capacity increases. It's reporting how much electricity it can absorb. At 4:30, there's a little purple. We heat it up again prior to the evening usage. And then we shed it like a normal time of use schedule from 5 to 9 o'clock. But look at what happens. There's a green sharp updraw, which means cold water came into the tank. And the tank says, hey, I know I'm supposed to be off, but I'm going to come on and top off a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of electricity, not as much as you see at the end of 9 o'clock when the dark greens and the power lasts a much longer time. So that's cold water prevention algorithms that are inside the water heater, and that's what makes CTA 2045 exciting, smarter appliances. Next slide, please. So here is the big new innovation that came out 2 weeks ago, CTA 2045-B Level 2. So what this says is that the utilities, especially in California, said, we want to make sure that if we're getting CTA 2045 certified water heaters, that they have the functions we want. So what they said was we want 3 levels of shed, one that's guaranteed off, as opposed to the smart water cold water prevention algorithm I talked about last slide, but one also that gives flexibility. And then 2 levels of load up, the regular load up, but then an advanced load up where there's a mixing valve and you can increase the set point and store more thermal energy in it, 500 watt hours instead of 200 to 300, at least 500. Now the M&V, I just showed you that. Each water heater is reporting its power usage and its storage capacity. Great data for being able to plan events. There's also a customer override feature. There's always a button on the water heater, sometimes on a mobile app, that the customer can use to say, I've got the soccer team showering today or a party happening, and for 24 to 72 hours, It doesn't respond to grid signals, but it automatically goes back to grid control after that time, which is very helpful. Advanced load up, we matched that with Title 24 JA13. That was a California requirement for new construction. So we've included that in the CTA standard, but we added that there's an efficiency recommendation. So utilities can say, hey, I've got negatively priced electricity. You can use your electric element, or no, I want you to load up, but please do it with your normal efficiency. Heat pump water heaters are 350 to 400% efficient rather than the 98 to 99% efficiency of electric resistance water heaters, which is why they're exciting. And then we've also planned ahead for prices to devices. So every CTA 2045B level 2 water heater can accept 64 time price pairs. We want to leapfrog time of use represented by California Title 24 JA13 and prepare for the world where it's real-time prices that are coming in 24 hours ahead, and the water heater can plan when to use energy at the low cost and not at the high cost. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the grid server, which is at the top. Now that's a price server, but it could also be delivering OpenADR, DNP3, or 2030.5. It can do it down on the right to a building central entity. That can be a gateway for a residential home or a building management system for a commercial building. Or it can do it to an aggregator. That's the third party on the left. And finally, those people can send signals directly to the device if it can handle that, but very often now it can't. Water heaters never had a schedule, never had connectivity. Ream in the last year or two had done Wi-Fi, but now everybody's committed to having the CTA 2045 port. That's the external control on the bottom. So that's just a view of all of the options for signaling that's coming down the pike. Next slide, please. Now, we want to point out that although some people are looking at time of use, and California is moving to time of use, and all of a sudden every residential homeowner like me has to decide, how am I going to respond to time of use? My water heater just comes on and off randomly. Well, what you're looking at on the right is 3 different load profiles of feeders in San Diego Gas and Electric. The top red profile matches the system peak, where the time of use peak is 5 to 9 p.m., those blue rectangles. But look at the bottom feeder. Their load profile of that entire feeder doesn't match the normal blue system peak. And therefore, if you have water heaters that are trying to shed during those blue rectangles, they're going to make that feeder station work. So we believe that being able to change schedules with either prices or daily or real-time connectivity really makes a difference because of these. Time of use essentially is a blunt instrument. Next slide, please. So, next slide. So I want to finish with 2 critical questions that are facing every utility in America, frankly, but certainly on the West Coast. Number 1, they're starting to incentivize heat pumps, but they're not making a difference between a connectable heat pump or just a heat pump. And that means that they only get the energy efficiency of the heat pump. But if you look at time of use is the next row, and that changes every 6 months, and you miss the daily, weekly, and monthly variability that we showed you on the animation at the beginning of this talk, where there's a lot of variability. And in fact, Pierre Delforge of NRDC has said that there's 2 times more grid value to be able to change the schedule and adjust it to GHG emissions and wholesale pricing every day. And so on those animations, we show you how there's a lot of variability every day, that a time of use is a blunt instrument and misses. And then finally, there's real-time changes that you need for fire season, as we know in California, or maybe the traditional demand response. And what we've found is that for $20 a year, you can connect and make a phone call to that water heater once a day and tweak its schedule, which means that for a roughly 10-year life of the water heater, for $200, you can talk to that water heater every day, or for $36 a year, which is twice as much, $360 for 10 years, you can talk to it on a real-time basis. And the final question that so there's a lot of research going in to try and measure what's better, the daily schedule or the time of use. And that's why California is also researching prices to devices. But the other big decision that utilities face is, do we just put in these water heaters and incentivize them to have the port, or should they be connected at installation? Imagine trying to do a marketing program where you try and tell everybody, go down and look at your water heater. You have billboards that say, look at your water heater and see if there's a port. And if there is a port, we'll mail you a module. Versus getting that module into the water heater at the time of install. It may be a lot cheaper to do it at the time of install and a lot more valuable. And that's my presentation. Thanks. You can go to the next person. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tris.